Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Peridiam, and this is a massive video, holy crap. Some of you may know I like to make top 5s, 10s, heck, I even went up to 16. While I could break this video up into several parts, I'm feeling ready to take the new year on my highest note ever. A new start, an old reference. As per usual, a lot of my top 10s, they began as a top 5, but I would be doing All of Us and Survivor a disservice by cutting this topic off at just 5, when I think 10 is more appropriate. And instead of rushing each performance in this ranking in like a 10-minute video, we're gonna talk through what I liked and why I have each of these finalists where they are in my top 10. Welcome to the top 10 best Final Tribal Council performances in Survivor.
I imagine it's probably a pretty difficult decision for some people, and I just want to say that I appreciate your making it. I wouldn't change anything that I did, and I hope you respect that that was what I felt I needed to do to play the game. Thanks.
I like to talk a little bit before I get to the ranking. Let me preface this list by saying that each of these 10 performances are fantastic. They are utterly fantastic. They each hit the nail on the head again and again. They really don't slip up even for a second, which is what makes differentiating between each of them all the more difficult. They all share common traits of exceptional quality, so to distinguish between the 10 of them, I took into consideration several factors. For one, I considered if the player was able to potentially flip the votes their way that they maybe didn't have before they gave their performance. I also took into account how much conviction they spoke with, how dynamic their responses were, if they incorporated different strategies, posited just different ideas, had any interplay with the jurors or even their fellow finalists. And I also took note of how I felt from a, I'll admit, emotional perspective, almost as if I was a juror watching them give their spiel to me like I was at the Final Tribal Council myself. I know it's heavily edited and that's not actually the case, but hey, we can all dream. Feel free to disagree with this list, I wouldn't expect anything less. That said, without further ado, let's break open a cold one, shift our attention to the finalists, and move forward with number 10.
On day 3 of this game, I gave you my jacket, and then I was blindsided. And every night, you wore my jacket to Tribal Council. And all I could think was, hot damn, that is badass.
Okay, get this. I'm a cop, but I'm a bad cop. I'm like a robber. Number 10 is Sarah Lucina, the cop who indeed played like a criminal from Survivor Game Changers. Believe it or not, Sarah didn't have a lot of screen time in her Final Tribal Council. A lot of it was reserved for Brad Culpepper, but what she did give us were very strong answers. Sarah walked into that Final Tribal Council with a lot of jurors who were put off by her rather manipulative gameplay, playing the middle time and again. For many, it was too manipulative, too dicey to their liking. It felt a little gross, so when you have Andrea bringing this up several times, Sarah decided to combat it by saying that's how she has to operate on a day-to-day basis with her job. In case you forgot, she's a cop. She formed genuine relationships, but she needed to do everything she could to leverage them to her benefit. Unlike a lot of people who play Survivor, she was trained for this. She is a professional. She knows what she's doing. She did everything she could to ensure she was controlling the direction of each vote, as she did indeed do for most of the post-merge. She also brings to notice a key aspect to her game: observation. As Richard Hatch stated in season 1, observation is so critical to succeeding in Survivor. Sarah was able to not only leverage her relationship, she was able to find that pivotal advantage hidden underneath Michaela at that one challenge, to which she eventually later used to vote Michaela out. I think that this point impressed the jury and likely won her points, and it was a smart aspect to point out.
Michaela's sitting on the sit-out bench, not getting to play. And at the bottom of her feet, I see something. It says secret advantage on it. Anyone that was there that day had the opportunity to see that. It wasn't hidden. Paying attention to detail is how my playing the game got me right here.
One of the major common trends amongst this top 10 is how they all speak to the jury, and Sarah continuously spoke with a fervor brimming with conviction. If you, yourself, listening to this video right now to my voice, if you are ever at a Final Tribal Council and Survivor in the future, I implore you to listen to these people talk and mimic their style. I implore you to say what you believe in a manner that bespeaks the determination with which you believe it. Number 9. Future Survivor winners may be crowned in Fiji, but there's only one true king of the island. Number 9 is Earl Cole, his performance from Season 14 Survivor Fiji, after he gave a very well-rounded, straightforward, almost perfectly by-the-books final tribal council performance that many might say was indeed the best ever. He begins his performance with what many of the players on this list do. He exclaims that he played a great game, and he hopes the jury can see that. He discusses that he took the high road without sacrificing his integrity. He didn't need to lie and be a snake or a rat. He was just that good. He brings up something that was music to my ears. He doesn't want a sympathy vote. He doesn't want a pity vote. He wants the respect. He wants the respect vote, and he intends to demand that throughout his performance. Stacy asked him if she should vote for the winner based on need of money, because clearly Earl was well educated and would land on his feet post-show, yet Earl, again, in his calming, rational voice, explains why everyone here needs the money, and that Stacy should really vote based on the gameplay, not on need. Earl is so careful with his tone. He never comes off as preachy or self-righteous. He maintains a calm voice. Even when Lisi shows up and just bombards him, or Rocky asks some weird kicking question.
How did you manipulate the best? Because everyone here did a little bit better. I know some of you are familiar with my vocabulary. The word kicker is going to come into play today. Kicker is a, clutch player and or best player.
I have to be one of the biggest kickers because I think I manipulate probably everybody up there because no one thought I was even playing the game.
That's a decent answer, too. I'm done. Nice move, brother. All right, good luck.
And most of all, unlike other Final Tribal losers, when Yao-Man asked Earl why he voted him out at the Final 4 instead of voting with him to take Yao to the Final 3, Earl simply says, "Yao, you played the best game here out of everyone. You would have crushed me." It's the truth. It butters Yao up, and it demonstrates Earl is playing the game, and he isn't afraid to admit it. Number 8. For all the beef this player can get for their game leading up to the Final Tribal, I gotta give it to him. This performance, in my opinion, is absolutely top 10 worthy. Number 8 is Adam Klein from Survivor Millennials vs. Generation X, after he sweeps the jury in a 10-0-0 vote against both Hannah and Ken. Now, I know that some fans out there like to write Adam's win off in a similar vein to Jeremy from Survivor Cambodia. He had a sob story and the jury felt bad for him, so forget literally 39 days of strategy and gameplay and relationship building up to that point. He was simply rewarded the million because he may or may not have gotten the jury to feel sad for him. That's bullshit. I'm sorry, pardon my French. Behind the scenes footage paints a much different picture. And Adam's performance in this Final Tribal is astounding. The guy is so incredibly headstrong and full of conviction. He opens by responding to Taylor's question with a sample of his strategic game, only to then compartmentalize both Ken and Hannah's roles as being the quintessential Gen X and Millennial players, but that Adam was a combination of both. He really goes on the offensive, and I think recognizes that Hannah is the more likely competition of the two sitting next to him, as he spends a majority of the footage devaluing her game and highlighting her blunders to reach the Final 3. He portrays himself as a wrangler who was always intending to reach the Final 3 with his two goats, Ken and Hannah, but it was difficult when they both made poor decisions in voting out Brett at the Final 5 and possibly going to a tiebreaker at the Final 4. Adam clearly had a strategy and he lived up to it, and his performance made sense in the eyes of the jury, even if Hannah's moves, while potentially erratic, also landed her in the exact same spot.
This is one of the two moments that I mentioned earlier where Hannah went rogue. I think that it was a terrible decision to leave David in the game and could have been $1 million mistake. I made sure that at the Final 6, there were 3 people in front of me that were bigger threats than I was, and one of my best allies was a challenged beast who could beat them and we could take them out.
After watching all of the Final Tribal Councils in preparation for this video, I think he's one of the most offensive and attacking finalists in this top 10, and really out of all of them. Even though I will say at times he did kind of feel a little bit too tunnel visioned in my liking, but that might just be due to the editing. And yes, I will address it, he did have an incredibly devastating bit of news to inform the jury about his mother. But hey, while I don't think that won him the game or maybe even secured him any votes, It definitely didn't hurt his chances at all if we're looking at it objectively. Number 7. I'm just a country bumpkin with a sweet old charming southern accent. You wouldn't possibly think about voting for anyone else now, would you? Look, I'm not trying to be biased to modern Survivor, but damn if the 30s didn't give us some strong final tribal council performances. Number 7 is the rather recent Nick Wilson from Survivor David vs. Goliath, the public defender from Kentucky who won the title of sole survivor by a 7-3-0 vote over Mike and Angelina. Now, of all the possible performances, I probably don't have to spend too much time here given Nick is pretty fresh in most of our minds. Nick had a fantastic performance that was absolutely top 10 worthy, at least from what we saw, because there is only so much footage after all, but from the snippets we did get, it was all gravy. Nick gets the first word at the tribal after Christian asks the finalists to talk in whatever order they want.
The outwit to me had two main factors: information and timing. The information in my mind is the social dynamics, the relationships you can build. So I would have one-on-one alliances with a lot of people. And to make it fun, we would even name them. Like Christian, we're the Mason-Dixon. And Elizabeth, the Thoroughbreds. We're both from Kentucky.
Right out of the gate, I love that Nick seizes that opportunity. He's very forthright about how he outwitted his competition. He succeeded because of two factors. His strong social relations afforded him lots of information to work with, as was demonstrated particularly in the early merge when he and the Davids were able to work together to systematically dismantle the Goliath strong majority. Nick was at the front of that incredible minority split vote that took out John, and it was a major feather in his cap. He also had excellent timing, which is also music to my ears, as I believe timing is so critical to doing well in the game. Nick also has a moment where he admits he wasn't perfect. He was blindsided when both Carl and Davey were taken out, but to his benefit, he spun that as a positive for both their interests because he wanted to work with them until the very end. He just didn't get the chance. I think that admitting that likely kept him in their good graces, even if it wasn't necessarily a display of good gameplay. I think the biggest key to Nick's performance is just how active he was in the game. That's the underlying theme that he continuously pitches to the jurors, and he does a great job selling it as his narrative. He highlights himself as the ultimate David, who was the underdog from the get-go, who was swapped into a minority position at Benny, and it mirrors this uphill battle that he has been facing for a lot of his life. Nick actually didn't tell anyone he was a public defender, but instead was this social worker, and he seemingly continued that narrative until the very end.
And instead of them going to prison, I try to get them to go to rehab, or basically just let people understand, like, if there's a breath left in your body, like, life is worth living. And if you're in this game, if you have any fight left in you, if you have a breath left in your body, this game is worth playing. You're never out of it.
Between mentioning slingshots to the Philistine army, a little bit hokey for my taste, but I get what he's going for, he always came across as a well-crafted storyteller with a strong air of confidence. And I think it worked out pretty well in the end. Number 6. Outwitting, outlasting, and outplaying. The three words inscribed upon the wait. No, it's outwit, outplay, outlast. Damn it, wrong order. What a pet peeve. Yes, number 6 said that. Outwit, outlast, outplay. I'm gonna keep saying that until the cows come home. It's Sophie Clark from Survivor South Pacific when she crushed both Coach and Albert in a 6-3-0 vote. Sophie opens her Final Tribal performance by pretty much prophesizing the later format of how Final Tribal would work. She touches upon how she outwitted, outplayed, and outlasted the jury and why it's worthy of their vote. She really runs the story of the season in her opener and even admits she's not perfect. Her social game, it was lacking, which I think touched upon a sore point for several of the jurors. It's open, honest, and concise. Let's get into it. One thing I really liked about Sophie's performance is how effective she is at reducing the importance of Coach as a player. She both makes herself look good while equally bringing him down several notches. She defines herself as a Russell or Boston Rob-esque player, while Coach was her young girl whom she took to the end. It's amusing to consider and unexpected to hear, and it demonstrates a level of agency and awareness of others and how they're perceived.
And when I met Coach, I saw him as the equivalent of a young girl. He was someone who said to me, my loyalty is worth more than $1 million. I want to come out of this game restoring who I am. That's a guy who's not going to write my name down.
She apologizes to Rick because that's what he was looking for. And while I'm not always a fan of when finalists apologize for their gameplay, sometimes saying you're sorry is a move in itself and can be the right move under the right circumstances. Look, if that's what a juror wants, it's probably in your best interest to give it to them. And in the case of Rick, it was the right move. She likewise humbles herself by admitting to Whitney that she is tough to get to know. Sophie appears genuinely sorry for this trait of hers, and I believe it's this raw honesty that wins the day over the likes of Albert and Coach, who very much didn't appear that way at all. Actually, at the very end, Coach does kind of break himself down, and he tells everyone he's not a very good strategist, attempting to admit he's aware of his faults too. He tried to build a nice house of cards, and it all came crumbling down to bite him. And then Sophie gets the last word in after Coach does this, and I love it as she says,
"In my real life, I'm not a devious person. I'm not a strategist, and it came to bite me."
I think it's probably my fault because I was his strategist, so.
Well, I was his original. Well, Sophie and I really did make a lot of help.
Thanks.
Number 5. I believe there is a rather large gap between number 1 and 5 and number 6 through 10 on this list. I think this top 5 is the top 5, at least to me, and it wasn't ever in question. The order of this top 5 is definitely up for debate, but no question about who's in it. And in some way, I may even have my number 5, which is coming up in a second, as my number 1 on another day of the week, just because of how effective and deadly the number 5's performance is. Number 5 is JT from Survivor Tocantins, who gave an incredible performance that I pretty much know like the back of my hand. Unlike the previous 5 on this list, JT was totally hamming up everything he did and said and appeared to feel for the jury. He was absolutely playing them, and kind of Steven to great effect. He gets all down and out, he's slumped over, he looks a bit pitiful, like he's somehow playing from behind. He's disappointed. In truth, JT knew that he was way out in front. He stood a good chance to pretty much beat anyone. JT pulled out all of the punches in his final tribal performance. He started out by immediately devaluing what Steven posited as a strong winning narrative, that Survivor really, it isn't about growing, it's about performing, which, by the way, JT did really well all season. He even then went up and talked up Steven to Aaron, explaining why he took Steven to the final 2, that Steven played the best game of anyone. Of course, except himself. Because really, that's all that matters. JT is the golden boy, and his answers were checking every box.
I really feel like Steven's a strong competitor. He won individual immunity necklace and almost beat me in the final immunity challenge, and of the stronger players that was left in the final 4, I believe that Steven was the strongest left.
Debbie remarks that he lied a bunch, so how is she supposed to know what JT is really like? Yet, JT just throws it right back at her. She lied too. It's Survivor. You gotta lie. And you know what? Debbie appreciates the honesty there. He really gets on this aw shucks bandwagon with Coach, saying him taking Steven may have been the wrong move when really he knows it wasn't. But his answers, again, are all here to appease the jury, to give them what they want to hear, which is kind of jury management 101. And it was apparently believable, even though it seems totally insincere to me sitting here now looking back at it for like the millionth time. I could go on about JT for a while. He does a lot really well, but I think it's important to note the main reason I don't have him higher than 5th. It's because I think he was gonna win that jury no matter what, and it all kind of feels like he was just continuously scoring touchdowns when he was already up by like 30 points at the end of the 4th quarter. It's a phenomenal performance. You could tell me it's the best and I would be all ears, but I don't know to what degree it was effective when I break it all down, whereas with the top 4, I can definitely note change occurring, votes won, really effective strategy. I hope that makes sense. I love JT. I'm not trying to bag on him.
Oh, come on now. You've been slandering me all night, and this is the first time I ever took a shot at you.
But mine have been all
And mine have been
accurate.
true. That is true as well. Listen, come on now.
Number 4. Take that performance and crank it to 11. Number 4 is one entry that many are probably thinking should be number 1, but it's not to me. It is Chris from Survivor Vanuatu, the lone man sitting in the end amidst a jury of scornful women intent on not letting a man win, only to then let a man win. Damn it, what happened there? Chris is another one of these amazing, flawless finalists who gives the performance of a lifetime. Similar to JT, Chris really hams it up at this final tribal, even more so I would say than JT, by just absolutely delivering lines and lines of grandiose, over-the-top, melodramatic bull crap on a silver platter, all for the jury to just eat right up. Basically, it's tough to tell what Chris really feels because the entire time he's giving the jurors what they want to hear, which is fantastic. It's one of those rare times where a finalist they just totally grovel at the feet of the jury, and the jury buys it hook, line, and sinker. But to be fair, I do think Chris meant a lot of what he said. He wasn't entirely playing them for fools. When Eliza calls him a bitch and says he made a bunch of unnecessary moves, he turns it around and just straight up apologizes to her. He speaks deeply with that conviction I keep talking about. Way more conviction than I think anyone on this list. And it's that level of conviction that has so many of the jurors believing in what he has to say. Whether or not he believes it really doesn't matter. It's just whether the jury does.
When I made that pact with you standing there, I didn't intend to do you wrong. I did it as strategy, and you're right. I owe you an apology. I broke our pact, and I am sorry.
Thank you.
But I do think he kind of does, because if they want an apology, if they want to feel redeemed, as Julie did when she talked about their relationship as brother-sister, he had no problem leaning absolutely into it. It was a matter of mending the bridges he had potentially burned, which also worked perfectly in tandem with Twyla sitting next to him, who was just basically pouring kerosene on her ashen-colored bridges. Chris goes down the line and literally tells every juror why they're awesome, in some way, in his own Chris way.
Scout, Julie, Eliza, Amy and Leanne, Chad and Sarge, no matter how you vote tonight, I still made 2 dear friends. So just vote from your heart. You know, just feel good about who you vote for, that's all.
And even after Scout calls him out on his bullshit, he still takes the time to touch up on that comment too by appeasing Scout and kind of even telling her what she wants to hear. Oh, and of course he gives Julie her hat. Of course. Ka-ching.
And I brought you your hat.
Number 3. And now we get to my dark horse pick. This is the pick that I think people are really going to be unsure about, but man, I am not. No matter how many times I rewatch this performance, I can't help but feel like everything said in it is just golden. The third best final tribal performance comes from none other than John Cochran from Survivor Karamoan Fans vs. Favorites 2. I do think Cochran had the game wrapped up about as much as like JT did at his final tribal, but I think the answers that Cochran gives are just a bit more nuanced. They are cleverer, more dynamic answers that display a wider range of understanding of the game at hand. Cochran is more forthright than JT or Chris, perhaps even more honest, but he's also more sophisticated too, and I kind of like that more. For example, Malcolm asked Cochran a question that's kind of similar to what Amy asked Chris. What is it that you have that I don't that put you in the final 3 and put me on the jury? And I kind of like Cochran's answer more to this question. He says a heightened sense of insecurity and explains why that actually worked to his advantage.
And that is a deep-seated insecurity, but I think it manifested itself in a healthy way because I ended up taking out people that were threats that had their own plans. I know that that contributed greatly to my moves, and I just can't imagine you being insecure. I guess that's why I'm imputing that as something that I have and you don't. Thanks.
It's an answer that both thinks outside the box while also complimenting Malcolm, as can be detected by Malcolm's reaction. It's like, we all get where Cochran is going with that answer, but maybe it's kind of true, and that's both good for him and for the juror. Or what about when Andrea asks him which animal he best represents? A total oddball question that could appear as a throwaway, but instead he takes a second and says chameleon, bringing up how he had to change his coloration depending on who he was with and at what stage in the game. Again, it's a good answer. Or when Brenda comes with fire and brimstone, she wants to know about when Cochran voted her out despite giving him a moment with his loved ones at the final 6. And his answer is perfect. It's both an understanding of the game and for what Brenda wanted.
In terms of telling you why you should vote for me, I think because you were a threat to my game and I took out a threat to my game. And that's, I think, the core of Survivor. Take out somebody before they can take you out. I mean, it's cold, but it's, I think, the truth.
Oh, and then he gets Eddie with this weird bar conversation. Yeah, Cochran did kind of ham it up for that one, saying he would be at the bar with the 3 amigos and 2 ladies next to him, but his answer got a chuckle out of all of them. They were eating it up, and there's just not much more he can ask for at that point. Cochran won 8-0-0, and deservedly so. I completely understood why he did did with this kind of performance. You know what? I think it's the most underrated performance simply because I never see people bring it up in their top 5 or top 3 or even as the best, which I could see myself arguing for tomorrow or next week or even while at Eddie's Dog Bar.
I'm going to be standing next to you, but we're going to be slightly different because I'm 2 women on each side of me, so it's going to be a slight physical distance. But no, I'm being serious. I would hang with you guys, and it's a unique feeling for me, and I think that's going to change how I interact socially with people well beyond the bounds of this game.
Number 2. As if things weren't already interesting in this list, now is when I think a lot of you are about to get blindsided. My number 2 best final tribal performance is Todd Herzog from Survivor China. What? Not number 1? What in the world? Exclamation mark, question mark, exclamation mark? Yes. Number 1 is unexpected, but let's talk about Todd for a hot minute, yeah? Todd opens the final tribal council with probably the greatest opener in Survivor history. He thanks the jury for everything, he touches upon all the lying and backstabbing, but he makes a point to first and foremost recognize there is a difference between what was real and what was game. He didn't want them to be hurt, to feel betrayed by what, to him, was just good gameplay. Todd wanted to align the jury from the get-go to recognize and respect his kind of gameplay, even if they were burned by it, and I love that. And of course, Todd is a super fan of the show, so he remarks on how this has been his dream for a while, and it's finally happening. I'm not really sure Courtney had that card up her sleeve. The famous handling of Jean Robert, it's legendary. JR is all about himself, and he loves to talk, and he loves to talk about himself, and so when he asked Todd, why did Todd take JR out when James was the bigger threat? Todd says this.
When you had approached me about blindsiding James, I was like, oh no, he's catching up. So who then becomes the biggest threat to me? You. What do I have to do? Turn it around on you, who is an extremely great strategic player in your daily life. I had to get rid of my biggest strategic threat. Who is you?
And everyone laughed because Jean Robert was no longer talking. He was humble, put in his place, he was silenced. And yeah, that was also amazing. PG also asks a great question. She talks about how some people may have viewed Todd as potentially easy to beat because he was a known liar. He had burned some bridges. Did Todd just slide into the final 3 because others let him, or was he actually strategic and worked hard to be where he was? Todd gives another great answer where he explains his setup to reach the end from day 1. He cites examples and clarifies his journey. He also apologizes to Frosty for hurting him, but he continues to sell the strategic acumen by explaining just how much attention he gave to making sure he had good relationships with the jurors as they went to the jury. Now, he didn't get Frosty's vote in the end, but the sentiment is still there. With Jamie, Todd outright says he deserves to win more than Courtney.
She just went along. That's it. The reason why you should not vote for Courtney is
Yes.
because she didn't want to be here in the first place.
So do you think she deserves it at all, or do you think...
I think I deserve it more than her.
Okay, great.
He also did the dirty work for Amanda. He took the brunt of the bad news as people were blindsided out the door. Overall, I think Todd was the perfect package as far as a final tribal performance goes. He played hard since day 1 and he had the receipts to show for it. It's a masterclass of a performance, only to one day be reduced to number 2 on my list by one person in particular. Number 1. Alright, I gotta stop saying this, but number 1 is from Australian Survivor. So if you haven't seen this season, spoilers. I mean, okay, I understand not everyone has seen Australian Survivor. They've not seen these seasons, but I gotta give credit where it's due because I totally missed this player in a previous video, in a previous ranking, and damn it, it is time to crown a queen. The best final tribal council performance in all of Survivor after nearly 20 years and multiple countries playing this game and going crazy. It was given by Christy Bennett from Australian Survivor in 2016. I always knew she was gonna be on this list, and not as a surprise secret number 1 entry, but as a definite contender for the number 1 spot. But when I went back to rewatch every single Final Tribal Council, Christy stood out to me more than anyone else's for a multitude of reasons. First of all, going into this final tribal, I gotta assume that a lot of the jury really didn't know what to make of Christy up to this point. I'm pretty sure behind the scenes sources have confirmed she only had like 1 or 2 votes locked up, if that. Unlike other players in this top 10, Christy was kind of an enigma. She left a lot to be desired from day 1 until now. And this is reflected in what the jury had to say by how several of them were caught off guard with her performance as it was unfolding live.
Hi, Christy. Nice to meet you tonight. Wow.
It's interesting because tonight you have come out balls to the wall, and you have literally been a different person. You are not the Christy that I have been watching for the last few weeks.
I've never seen in all of Survivor a player immediately shock me with just their first words at a final tribal. Christy made it a point to address the jury's apprehension and confusion for who she was as a player. She gets right to it, and I love that. She immediately explained her narrative, her story of having the odds completely stacked against her, both physically and in how the game broke out. Basically, bad luck. For those of you who don't know, and for those of you who do know, Christy was on a pre-merge tribe that was decimated to only 3 people by the merge, joining an opposing tribe of 10, merging at the final 13. And to make it even worse, the 2 allies that she had going into that merge were both picked off right away, so now it was 10-1. And yet, here she was at the very end at the final 2 after 20 tribal councils and 2 whole tribes. She explains to Elle that she intentionally faded into the background amidst a burgeoning Sinapu tribe. She explains to Flick and counters this big moves mantra of needing to do something flashy and extra by talking about being in the shadows and how not making a move can be just as powerful and critical as making a move.
Playing the game can be done in so many different ways. Yes, you can make big moves, but sometimes it is about the smaller, subtle moves. I didn't have to collaborate with you. That's a move. It's subtle, but it's a move.
It's difficult to notice when someone is intentionally not doing something. But in Christy's case, that was the case. Her game was predicated on making small, subtle moves throughout. And here she was in the final 2. Likewise, she makes a similar pitch to Brooke by explaining her passive game as being intentional. It was entirely intentional. And what makes all of this believable and not just, rolling her eyes and shrugging it off is the way in which Christy speaks. She takes many pregnant pauses for dramatic effect, and like the rest of this list, speaks with a strong sense of conviction. She wholeheartedly believes what she's saying, and she needs you to believe it too. This conviction sells her story to her audience and makes it believable. And in Christy's case, this was so important and crucial because she absolutely needed to explain her game here and make sure it was understood, as it wasn't really laid out throughout the game up to this point. This isn't like Tony in Survivor Cagayan, where everyone pretty much saw Tony at every point in time and knew exactly what he was doing. She also apologizes to Sue for flipping on her, but then relays that to say it fed into her strategy of knowing who was leaving at each elimination.
I went through the entire game to 20 tribal councils and knew who was going home every single time.
It just sounds so badass to say that. Like when Denise in Survivor Philippines was able to mention having gone to every tribal council in a season. Also, for the record, Denise is an honorable mention, I should say that. Christy knew everything, or at least was positing the idea that she knew everything, and her inflection and tone made it feel like reality. Whether or not it was, I don't know, but either way, it was great to hear. And then at the very end of it all, she touches up on her panic attacks and this duality of her character and her journey from the start of the game on day 1 to where she's at now. She talks about how she is a super fan, that this is her dream, that you can pick yourself up, that
the whole essence of Survivor is breaking through that adversity, and if you can't do that, where are you gonna go? Home.
Good answer. Well done. And that is going to be the top 10 best Final Tribal Council performances in all of Survivor. Whew. If you stuck around this long, you got my vote. What do you guys think about my top 10? Do you agree with it? Was there someone I might have missed? Please don't make me redo this. Either way, thank you for watching, probably more than any other video because this is long. I hope you enjoyed it. I really do. Don't forget to stutter and mumble and trip over your words on your way out, and I will see you in the next one. Once I totally forget what I was gonna say, I am so nervous.
I was gonna look at all of you like people I deal with on a day-to-day basis. And I'm so nervous. This is like so crazy. I'm just so nervous.
I don't know how you've done this.
You deserve to be the sole survivor.
You're still a naughty little girl.
I never thought I would be writing your name down.
You beat the odds.
You showed me that you earned it.